Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Go Local Live. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in today as we talk about bringing meaning and impact to your life and career. Now, joining us is Jim Tull. You might know Jim from around Rhode Island, working with the homeless, working in the prisons, and of course, working at Amos House. Jim, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Kate, for having me.
Of course, this is your work with Providence College's School of Continuing Education, Global Studies, Philosophy, Community Service, but want to kick off with a book that you wrote a number of years ago that is eerily accurate today. Now, this is Positive Thinking in a Dark Age. Tell us about your decision to write this book, what is in it, and then how you felt during the pandemic having penned this book.
It's a collection of essays that I wrote between 2000 and 2015. But they do have this common thread of how do we think positively in a dark age. And when that book came out a few years ago, dark age may have been kind of a leap, but nowadays it doesn't sound so remote, especially after the pandemic. And so I want to encourage readers to think about the future in the uncertainty of the future as a friend rather than an enemy. So the essays are really attempting to help activists in particular think about how we can forge a future for our grandchildren that we want for them, given the turbulence of our time right now.
And obviously you penned the book, but how did you feel during the pandemic, like everybody else, obviously in academia, about what the worldview was going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, I think the pandemic, like a lot of folks have said, have given us an opportunity to pause and reflect about our values, and individually and also collectively. So I'm hoping that in the wake of the pandemic, we will have learned that we need to make fundamental changes in the way we live, if only to save ourselves on the planet at this point.
So let's segue to Providence College's School of Continuing Education and Global Studies in particular. Of course, the pandemic has shown us that we're not alone. The whole world is in this together. Now, when it comes to continuing education, especially as it impacts one's career, one of the things you ask students to do is not think about what is it I want to do, but what is it I can do that will have an impact. Now, it seems a little daunting, of course, what can one person do, but walk us through this process in global studies to really, think globally and acting locally.
Well, I want to correct you, Kate, a little bit, and that is, I encourage students to think carefully about what they want to do and what their passion is, but to consider a life of activism in a broad sense of the word, simply caring about something beyond yourself and your family. And so the question then becomes, how does what I want, what my passion is, connect with or interface with how I can make an impact in the world? And so I try to encourage students to think about themselves as being activists and participate in some way in creating social change. But the course, of course, is rooted in a critique of globalization, our global systems. And so there's a global view to the course, but there's also an emphasis on action that is taken at the local level. How can we create alternative systems that are perhaps more sustainable and more just and more inclusive? And rather than think about, and this is part of the positive thinking dimension of the book, and that is, if we think about how the global issues widely, it's very daunting. But to think about how we can address global issues at the local level in so many different ways becomes more manageable for people.
So who's the typical student you get in your course, Jim, for global studies that they themselves may be watching right now, asking these types of questions? Who comes to global studies and for what reason?
Variety of reasons. Some students are really interested in thinking about global issues and sort of acquiring tools for doing that because they feel scared and they feel intimidated about what's happening, and they may be paralyzed even. There's students who are taking the course because the college requires that all students fulfill a core requirement that involves some kind of community engagement. So this course does include a community engagement component. But so a lot of students come in for different reasons, but we have a common experience where we are allowing ourselves to face very difficult issues that we may have sealed off from ourselves in order to protect ourselves. But once that seal is broken and the conversation begins and we do readings and writing and so forth, students become more comfortable with having to face these very big problems. And they feel also at the end that they have some agency in addressing them. So they're not paralyzed, and they feel like they have something to contribute.
And let's talk a little bit about that as you talk about that practical application in the course itself. Give us an example of what that looks like at the college.
Well, we've been hampered a little bit this last year, so forgive my answer. But before this year, and we have done as much as we could during the pandemic, but during the class, the students usually we do it in groups. We make trips to various organizations that are working locally. One of the themes in the last few semesters, the theme, really, the unifying theme has been food.
Yes.
And Rhode Island is a national leader in the local food movement. And so I've taken advantage of that as a teacher of this class to equate students with the various ways in which we are responding in Rhode Island to global issues by creating local food systems, like a community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, community gardens, and a variety of other ways in which people are doing that. And everybody has to eat, and so this has been an opportunity for students to get out and to walk through the aisles of the farmers markets or visit community gardens and so forth. So and we do some service sometimes with that, but so students get to see activists, again, in the broader sense of the word, changing the world.
And just want to talk a little bit about that food insecurity, especially because, the stats right now, it's the most hunger since the Great Depression. How you talk a little bit about Rhode Island being at the forefront there. How can we, as you said, community gardening, really boiling things to the local level, is that really going to help lead the fight to make sure that there is enough food for folks in need?
Yes, it is, because the global food system seems very robust when you go to the supermarket, but it's also very precarious. And that's what students learn in this class, is that the global food system is not only planet killing, but it is also very tenuous in its capacity to feed people. It's touted as feeding the world, but it really most food is being produced at the local level. So what's happening in Rhode Island is that Rhode Islanders are gradually building the infrastructure to be able to feed itself, and it's a long, long way to go. But it's happening, and the idea is that we are creating systems here that will be able to support people in this very important area of food when and as the global food system, the industrial global food system, begins to wear and fail.
And so you predict that, you see that. Obviously, we saw it with the pandemic, clearly what could be shipped, what couldn't, clearly the breakdown. So you foresee that regardless, but as we know, we could still see more pandemics.
Yeah, the globalization has pushed human societies to the limit in terms of how the Earth can support this kind of expansion. And pandemics come into our world, and globalization not only is the kind of the cause of the pandemic by breaching the boundaries between the civilized and the wild, but also, of course, it spreads it so quickly. So, but pandemics, climate change, global economic inequality, there are a number of fronts in which globalization is being challenged. So the local dimension is, how can we literally create alternative systems to the global systems, and also support others abroad doing the same thing, so that we can begin to support ourselves sustainably and justly over an indefinite period of time. Because at this point, globalization is at its end point, I think.
Very interesting vantage point. And of course, another thing that is an issue that continues to need to be addressed is housing, affordable housing, and also the issue of homelessness. Now, clearly here in Rhode Island, they're trying to put resources towards affordable housing, but government, especially, working with nonprofits, continues to struggle to assist those who are most in need. Talk with us a little bit about how you see moving forward, being able to provide the most vulnerable with a roof.
When I was at Amos House, just in the beginning, literally when the shelter started to open in the early '80s, we were focusing on sheltering people, just getting them out of the elements. And soon after that, at least my experience was that we needed to shift to housing. And maybe I was just doing catch up there, realizing that. So by the late '80s, a lot of work, and I was putting a lot of effort into getting the federal government to create affordable housing, which it has the capacity to do. What's bizarre now is that there is plenty of housing in our country, in the United States. A lot of it is vacant, a lot of it is underused, and there has been a tension between preserving the environment and building more housing. But there certainly isn't, just as there isn't a shortage of food, certainly there isn't a shortage of housing stock, but there is a unequal distribution of it. So there's a way in which we have to be smarter, I guess, about our housing, as well as create more units for people that are affordable in every community in Rhode Island.
And again, can this, we talk about the issue of homelessness. There was, last week, a person just sleeping right at City Hall. Is the current approach, as you said, just to shelter people to then get them in the house? I mean, is that shift continuing really to try to get all folks permanent housing?
Yeah, I mean, one of the encouraging movements that's happened recently is Housing First. The premise of that is that without a stable place to live, the other things that we need to have are not easily accessible. There's so many ways in which just having an address and having a kind of a place to move from is really critical for any of us. But we've never, until recently, we haven't really done that. We've always kind of worked from the sheltering emergency, position, and work up to the housing. But housing should be the first thing that people should have.
Well, having you on today here again, talking about finding impact and meaning for both life and career, and how your courses at the School of Continuing Education can assist in that. Anything else you want to share with viewers while we have you here?
Yeah, simply that I hope all of us will take advantage of this time, the pause that we've had, which has been very unevenly experienced by people. But still, all of us have had to pause in some way or another to rethink the fundamental ways in which we're living and ask ourselves, what is well-being? What do we want in life? And I think there is a philosophical dimension and maybe a spiritual dimension to the change that we need to make, because the way that our world is working is not working so well, even for those for whom it's intended to work, the middle and upper class, because there's a lot of depression, a lot of suicide that's happening in our world. So I think we need to examine our basic values and also our desires in order to create a way of life that, again, we want for our children and ourselves in the future.
Well, Jim Tull, and teaching at the School of Continuing Education at Providence College, students can address these very questions. So if you're watching here on GoLocal Live right now, be sure to check back around. We'll have all the links to the School of Continuing Education and, of course, Jim's programs there. So Jim Tull, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to talking with you soon.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching us on GoLocal Live. We'll be back more this afternoon with more live here in downtown Providence. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.